Hello, everyone. I think you've all got me. Hopefully you've all got me. Welcome to the August online chapter meeting of the Building Designers Association of Australia. My name is Jennifer Binns. I'm a building designer based on the east coast of Tasmania, and I'm your host for the online chapter meetings with Sarah Jane in the background, managing technology. Post a message in the chat box and let us know where you're logging in from, and welcome. Thank you for joining us. A number of you are likely in lockdown at the moment, so hopefully you're doing okay. There are several events coming up this week which may be of interest to you. Tomorrow, Matilda Martin is presenting The Power of Biophilia. This is a short TED Talk style presentation which lasts for 30 minutes and is free for everyone to join. Sarah Jane will post a link in the chat box now for you if you want to register for the event. On Thursday, we have a members only event with Weber Insurance and Keystone Lawyers who will be discussing the contract of engagement. If you don't have a copy of the latest contract of engagement, it can be found on the members only area of the website and also in the new BDAA connected community. Hopefully you've all received information about the connected community. On Friday, Sarah Jane will be presenting a live tutorial on how to navigate this fantastic new tool which all members have access to. Also a reminder for everyone that August 18 is International Building Designer Day. There are lots of events taking place and we would love to know what you've got planned. Please drop us a note in the chat box with your social handles and we can be sure to follow you. One of the many events taking place is Around the World in a Day, where building designers around the world are invited to participate in a groundbreaking 24-hour centre stage extravaganza. Designers can present for 15 minutes. It's a free opportunity to stand on the global stage and present your latest project or insights to a global audience. What a fantastic opportunity. The link to be a guest speaker and link to watch these presentations in a drop-in, drop-out style webinar are now in the chat box. There are also a lot of social tiles that you can download from the BDAA website to share on the day and show your support for our industry. And Sarah Jane will also post a link to these in the chat box for quick and easy access. Before we start our presentations, a quick run through of the Zoom tools. You're welcome to ask questions throughout the meeting using the Q&A box, and our presenters will answer your questions either throughout the presentation or at the end. The Q&A feature also allows you to upvote topics, and if you'd like to ask a question via audio, there's a raise your hand tool, and we just ask that you check there's no background noise that will interfere with the audio when we unmute you to ask your question. The chat box is there as a continuous message thread for comments, and Sarah Jane will use the chat box to post links. So comments in the chat box, questions in the Q&A box. Now, up to our presentations. First up today, we have Germano Tomasetti, who is the National Business Manager of ITI ASI, and he will be discussing the global factors influencing timber supply and their impact on pricing. Just wondering if we've got Germano online. It doesn't look like we have yet. SJ, would you like?
No, we do. He's just being transferred across now and he's about to go live.
Lovely. Have we got you, Germano?
Yes.
Hello, welcome.
Hi, thank you.
Are you ready to go? I'll hand over to you.
Yeah, as ready as I'll ever be with this sort of technology.
Nice background. All right.
Thanks.
Over to you.
Thank you. I'm just going to share my screen. Sorry. As I said, with this sort of technology, it's best as I am. Okay. Hi, everybody. I really appreciate the opportunity to talk to you all. I've been asked to come on board today and talk about what's happening with timber supply around the world and what's influencing timber supply around the world. For those who don't know, ITI Australia is the largest timber distributor in Australia. We're also the second largest wholesale timber distributor in New Zealand. We have a manufacturing facility in Chile and we have a sourcing office in Indonesia. Just to give you a bit of background. I've been in the timber game for about 25 years. I've never seen anything like what's happening today. What's happening over the last 12 months, what's currently going on. So let's just get started. So I've tried to put this into a series of things, factors that we see influencing the industry today. obviously at the top of the list is the pandemic, COVID. I've got free money in there. I'll go through each of these. The explosion in consumption, resource destruction, Russian log ban on exports, and the worldwide shipping crisis. These have come together to create the perfect storm for not just the timber industry, I guess, but building industry in general. So we'll have a look at the pandemic. So when COVID began, industry, like all industries, went into a bit of a panic, and large producers began to shut lines and mills on the basis that they thought world demand would plummet. At the same time, government lockdowns were forcing plants to shut down. So those that did try to remain open were being forced to shut down. New Zealand sawmills, for instance, were locked for 6 weeks. Mills across North America and Europe were crippled by stay-at-home orders. And we had similar issues in South America, in China, pretty much all around the world. What then began to happen was we started to realise that demand was not falling away, and in fact, demand was growing. And so as production plants tried to come back online, shutting a mill is easy. Starting a sawmill is never as easy, and it never goes as planned. And so production plants really struggled to get back online. And one of the big constraints was getting workers back to the plants. Countries like China, Brazil, Chile, even some parts of Europe really struggled to get full workforces back to their operations. And the truth is, today, many countries are still struggling. The Delta strain is playing havoc in parts of the world, such as Indonesia, Malaysia, where production has been absolutely devastated by the new strain. So this production inability to get back online has led to a huge mismatch between consumption and production output, something we've not seen before. Take that, and then you add to that what's happened with money around the world. The pandemic has seen governments around the world hand out more money in the past year than in the history of the fiat currency. I read a stat not long ago that said in the USA alone, 20% of all US dollars created in history were created in 2020. You have people sitting at home with no job, money flowing in, and some were actually earning more money at home than they were when they were employed. Interest rates at all-time lows. Having money in the bank meant you're going backwards. And we saw equities begin a V-shaped recovery after the COVID dump. And they actually surged to record highs, as we all know, and people were looking for places to get returns on their money. And typically property, mums and dads turn to property for investment. Australian government introduced the homeowners grant. All of this stimulus and record low interest rates really drove spending around our industry. Okay, so what happened was we first started to see a consumption explosion in alterations and additions. As I said, people at home with nothing but time on their hands decided to renovate, and this drove a massive increase in consumption of all building materials, timber included. Money normally spent on vacations, new government stimulus was all being used to do odd jobs or renovations or big renovations that people have been putting off for years. The US was a leader in this segment. In one quarter alone, Home Depot had an $8 billion increase in sales revenue on the same quarter in 2019. And that was driven by this stimulus and time on people's hands. Now, this just an example of the USA, but this surge was happening around the world, and that is really unusual. What I've seen and what the industry's seen over the years is that the world always works in counter-cyclical motion. So when the Northern Hemisphere is up in their summer, their spring, and their peak building times, the Southern Hemisphere markets are at their quietest. And so wood flow around the world is balanced. But what we've seen over the last 18 months now, or 12 to 18 months now, has been the whole world is running hot at the same time. And the industry just can't handle the levels of consumption. You add to that the fact that new housing starts started to surge over the last 12 months. In the USA, housing starts rose from approximately 1 million to 1.6 million in the last 12 months. Australia's homeowners grant saw people pile into new home contracts, so much so that we saw a 42% increase in the private sector. European house starts also rising rapidly, and New Zealand building at record levels. All of this on top of an alterations and additions market that's running hot, again, normally counter-cyclical. When people aren't building new homes, they're renovating their old place or the place they live in, When people are building new homes, they're not renovating. But the last 12 to 18 months has seen everything happening at the same time. So the need for timber and all building products, it has exploded. And yet production has been severely hampered. This has led to surging prices in the USA. It's where they first started to surge. And so a lot of the European and South American mills focus their production on chasing higher returns in the US market. 350 million, 360 million people, and their production plants were not running at capacity. A massive shortage of wood in the US market. So the US market began to absorb much of the world's timber. And what happened was, as they were absorbing the world's timber, demand growing in other countries was being left short. And Australia was a huge loser in this segment. Normally markets like Europe and South America, mills in those countries that supply to Australia, Arauco, Metza, Storenzo, all these big players turned their back predominantly on Australia and went in chase of higher returns. And when you're in the timber industry, you can understand that, because production mills are not usually that profitable. So when prices spike 400%, mills will chase the dollar. So you've got COVID, you've got free money, you've got consumption going through the roof, and at the same time, we've seen resource destruction at some of the highest rates we've seen in a long time. So you had the East Coast fires in Australia, where we had 40% of our forest burnt. Sawmills in Australia are struggling to get logs. Loss of logs in New South Wales has seen two of our biggest sawmill producers, AKD and Hine, reduce their mega plants to one shift. New South Wales forestry has been caught short and is about 10 years behind in plantings. Pardon the spelling there. We saw California wildfires destroy millions of acres forests, and we've had, this is not new, but it is increasing rapidly, is infestations in forestry around the world. A couple of examples are the bark beetle in Europe, which has been decimating European forests, and foresters have been in mills cutting down trees as fast as they can to salvage what they can. And in Canada, we've seen a huge increase in moth infestation. As you can see, 1,200% in between 2019 and 2020, absolutely devastating Canadian forests. So you've now got a massive demand drive, production mills struggling with workforce, and you've got this resource destruction. We then had Russian government coming out and announcing that they would ban the export of logs. Russia is one of the largest forestry reserves in Europe and supplies logs all around the world. A lot of the product we buy is produced from Russian larch or birch. This has huge implications for China, for countries such as China. And I'll give you an example. We have an LVL plant in China that has gone from 4,000 cubic metres a month of output to 500 because of its inability to buy log out of Russia. And we're now looking for what we can do with that plant. Canada decided to stop exports into China because it wanted to supply the US market, chasing the dollar. The Chinese market needed to replace this supply. And what we've seen this year is log exports from New Zealand and the European markets to China hit record levels. Again, this has driven prices for logs, because if you are a local producer in New Zealand or in South America, if you do not pay parity price with what China pays for logs, you don't get logs. So you have the US consumption, the European consumption driving price. You've got China's need for log driving price. And you've got all of that creating this huge price spike and this huge decrease in supply for the Australian market. Then we have the next factor, and that's the worldwide shipping crisis. I'm sure many of you have heard about what's been going on, but if I'm repeating what you already know, I apologise, but this is all part of what's going on today and what's creating the shortage that we here in Australia. It's not just us, the world's facing, but we're seeing it pretty hard. When the pandemic started, a number of the shipping companies panicked, like the sawmill, like all industry, and took ships out of rotation. What happened was, as the world didn't collapse, shipping companies decided not to put ships back into rotation and rather start driving up their prices through shortage of supply, demand supply. It's gotten that bad that last month, the US president started an inquiry with the FMC into shipping worldwide to try and resolve this issue. That hasn't been helped by China's trade wars, which has seen less containers returned to China. We've seen severe space and equipment issues globally. You have to understand that China controls a lot of the shipping routes, as does Singapore. And so the problems China is facing have manifested around the world. COVID has had a huge impact on ports and still is, so much so that as recent as last month, ports in South China were 600,000 containers behind due to rising COVID levels again, the new Delta strain, and a lack of workers. We had the Suez Canal blockage about a month and a half ago, which was for 1 week, which stopped the movement of 385,000 containers. We've got vessel delays, vessel congestion, truck congestion, huge impacts on China's infrastructure. Empty containers are being recycled at 48% of full container consumption. So what we're finding, there's a huge imbalance in the the empty containers to full containers around the world. So much so that our plant in Chile is road freighting containers 600 kilometres to our site at an extra $1,000 a container, just to have containers to pack goods in to ship. It's a huge problem, the recycling of empty containers. Shipping lines are cancelling bookings due to overbooked capacity, and this again goes back to lack of equipment, lack of ships, spiking driving prices up. You've got the west coast of the USA ports in absolute turmoil, and you can see there that recently we had 55 vessels sitting on the US west coast and berths taking 5 weeks to become available. So that means a ship can sit off the coast for up to 5 weeks before it can get a spot to unload its cargo. And all of that just compounds around the world because sailings get delayed. New Zealand's facing the same issue. New Zealand's a big timber exporter to Australia. Australia's had industrial action on the ports, and it continues and has done for the last 6 to 9 months, which has really caused huge issues in congestion and caused shipping companies to avoid coming to Australia. So you've got a lack of ships, you've got issues on its Australian ports, and you've got companies cancelling sailings to Australia, shipping companies. So impact on, so what does this mean? We've had, oh, sorry, just excuse me for a second. Yeah, sorry. So all these factors have led to consumption outstripping supply. The biggest markets have driven prices skywards, and they've chased timber around the world. And this has led to European mills that would normally supply Australian markets supplying their own backyard, as well as the US looking for that higher return. Mills, I've spoken to some of the mills in Europe, and they are booked solid for 12 months in advance. That's unheard of. You normally would book a quarter. You would normally book, if you're a sawmill producer, you book the next quarter when the last quarter rolls over. So being booked 12 months in advance is, as I say, unheard of. The New Zealand domestic market building at record numbers means that New Zealand's absorbing a lot of the wood that they would normally ship to Australia. So you have that, and you have record log supply to China out of New Zealand. Means that numbers or volume of lumber coming from New Zealand to Australia has fallen. You've seen the devastating fires in Australia and underplanting by Forestry New South Wales having an impact on Australian production. And then you add to that the fact that ships aren't coming to Australia. There've been we are constantly having our product bumped from vessels. And that just leads to more and more delay. Huge impacts on engineered wood, huge impacts on decking, huge impacts on treated lumber. So it is the perfect storm. We've not seen anything like this before. What does this mean for pricing? Well, I can tell you that China to Australia, that shipping route has gone up 11 times. So that price has increased 11-fold. That's not just to Australia. The Shanghai to Rotterdam, which is one of the busiest routes on the shipping line, has increased 500% in the last 8 months. Port costs have surged because of congestion. And so you add the increased shipping costs. So a container used to represent 3 to 4% of a product's cost, the shipping cost, of a container. Today, that represents about 35% of the cost of that product. And so it's driving prices. Demand on logs is driving prices. US demand for sawn lumber is driving prices. European demand for sawn lumber is driving prices. This is the classic demand supply. Then you've got all the production costs and raw material costs and packaging costs that go into producing finished goods driving price. All of this has led us to highest timber prices on record. We've seen increases on products 100% in 6 months. I've not seen that in 25 years, nor I would imagine has anyone seen that in any industry really, but it's had a huge impact on our ability to source wood and the cost of the timber. Sorry. So I guess in summary, sorry, that's my last slide. In summary, the factors driving this market, it's a black swan event. The pandemic has meant that governments have handed out trillions and trillions of dollars, and people have had nothing to do but to renovate, to make alterations. Money in the bank is worthless. People have looked for investments. Property prices continue to surge. People continue to drive into the property. Housing starts have going through the roof. Shipping, log supply, all of it has led to the timber shortage that we're facing today. That's all I have. If anyone has any questions.
Hi, Jemima. That was really interesting. Thank you for putting all that information together for us. There are a few questions that have come through. Would you like me to read them out to you?
Yeah, I'll try and answer them. If I don't know them, I will have to revert back, but yes.
Edward has asked, is the increase in demand for timber, is it also due to zero carbon supply chain policies?
Look, that is not what's driving this black swan event. That's not what's driving this. There is definitely more interest in building with timber. The Europeans have been building and designing with timber a lot longer than the Australians have, and their love for timber has a lot to do with that, exactly that drive for, a sustainable building product. But what's driving timber prices today, because that trend has been growing, but it hasn't influenced pricing like the issues that I've just spoken about today. The consumption for timber products around the world right now is unseen or unheard of, and that's what's really driving this record price level.
Thank you. I think one question that quite a few people are wanting to know is advice about specific materials which we might specify to avoid compounding these problems, or to avoid the pricing premiums that are being paid. Are there specific products that we should be avoiding?
In the timber industry? You mean
yes,
timber products?
Yes, specifically in
timber. It's impacted all timber products. So so they all come from logs, and it's all produced from the one type of resource. So it doesn't matter whether it's structural, framing, solid, or engineered wood, or LVL, or I-joist, or mouldings, or it is all being driven by the same demand. And so there's nowhere that you can go to try and minimise the impact, I guess, on your costings if you're designing at the moment with timber, because it's all being impacted. There's no product category that's being left untouched. Panels as well, plywood, flooring products, Australian hardwoods are going through the roof. The shortage in Australian hardwoods has never been seen as it is today. Australian hardwood decking is basically being phased out because of the fires that happened through Australia, so that they can put that product into flooring products. There's no escape from it at the moment, and I don't think there's going to be any escape for 12 months. I think we've got 12 more months of supply constraint, shipping constraint, and production issues.
And that answers there's a few questions that have come through about when we're likely to see an improvement in supply. So you're thinking 12 months.
Yeah, our guess, and this is just our guess based on discussions with European mills, so I have big customers in the USA that we sell to. Based on what all these people are saying, our guess is that we've got this financial year is going to see the same as the last financial year in terms of the prices. Prices will hold. I don't think we'll see a lot more increase now because they're starting to stabilise. But the demand and the shortage is there for 12 more months. I mean, you just have to look at starts around the world. They're at record levels in many places. And because of COVID lockdowns, all that sort of thing, and labour shortages, those demands are being pushed out. And so we think we've got 12 more months of this sort of scrapping, I guess you would say, for resource.
There are lots more questions here, Jemana. I'm wondering if you're able to stay online. We've just got to go to our next presentation, but it would be great if you could stay online and we could just come back and answer some of those questions. Have you got time to be able to do that?
Sure, yeah, sure.
Absolutely, thank you. So we'll just go now to Ian Bassett. Have we got you online, Ian? So Ian is going to review the New South Wales Design and Building Practitioners regulations that came into force on the 1st of July this year. So that's been a big change for designers in New South Wales. So if you're there, Ian.
I'm here, ready to go.
Lovely, I'll hand over to you.
Yeah. Okay, this is a follow-on from the presentation I did about a month ago on the Class 2 registration in New South Wales. And we've had lots and lots of questions come up about it, particularly the transition provisions of getting licensed for the Class 2 work. What I'd like to do today is just highlight a bit more on the transition provisions that we've been able to negotiate with the New South Wales government. And I do apologise for those from other states watching this, but this is really a very much a New South Wales centric activity, unfortunately, although we are in discussions currently with some government people in South Australia and other governments as well. So it could very simply follow through to other states as well. So what we need to look at is the transition provision is for those people or building designers who do not hold the required qualifications for registration. And quite a few people don't have the diploma or the advanced diploma, which is the must-have. And we've been able to negotiate a range of activities that can sort of supplant that information that you need to give. Now, the building designer must meet the knowledge and skills requirements for the class of registration they're applying for. You complete a BDAA competency assessment. You must have a minimum of 10 years experience or part-time or practical experience within the last 15 years, including at least 2 years Australian experience. So for those people that hold overseas qualifications, it doesn't disqualify them over that, and some of that work you do overseas is allowable, but you must have at least 2 years in Australia. So the practical experience must be relevant to the class of registration involving a Class 2 building or a 3, 9A or 9C, which has a Class 2 component within it. So the emphasis is on Class 2. So what's the process of assessment under these transition? If you're not yet accredited, building designers who do not hold current BDAA accreditation, you'll be required to undergo a full accreditation assessment for the level of registration that you're seeking, either low rise or medium rise. This process would follow the normal accreditation process described in the BDAA accreditation program documents. However, projects submitted for assessment must be a Class 2 design, and applicants will undergo an interview along with completing a National Construction Code questionnaire. These applicants will then receive a BDAA accreditation certificate for the level they're applying for, along with a certificate of competence that they can submit with their DMBP registration application. That's the Design and Building Practitioners application. That certificate of competence is what you use when it asks you for what is your qualification, or you upload your qualification documents, you upload that certificate of competence. Now, we have had our first person go through that process last week and lodge their certificate of competence, and it was accepted by the government. So it does work, which is a bit of a pleasant surprise, I guess, in some ways. If you're already accredited, so those building designers who already hold BDAA accreditation, you'll be required to undergo an audit of your competence prior to the issuing of the competency certificate that's required by the department. So those undertaking this enhanced audit for registration are required to provide a copy of their PII certificate of currency, a summary of their CPD activities for the previous 12 months, and 2 sets of working drawings of recent Class 2 projects, including project-specific specifications for these projects. Again, I emphasise they have to be Class 2 projects. These audits will also include an interview, along with completing an NCC questionnaire. So accredited building designers wishing to undertake this audit are required to complete the audit application form, which will be online this week. That's a special form we've got on there, and you'll be able to log on to that. You'll also then, these applicants will receive a certificate of competence over and above the certificate of accreditation they already have, that they can then submit with their DMBP registration application. Fairly straightforward. Just remember, Class 2 projects. Upgrade. Now, some people need to upgrade their accreditation. So if you hold level 3 or low rise accreditation and you wish to apply for level 2 medium rise registration, you will need to upgrade your BDAA accreditation accordingly and complete the medium rise application form at the times of applying for the audit. For building designers who are undertaking accreditation with the last 12 months at this level, and there's a few out there, we'll require you to provide samples of Class 2 designs, a completed NCC questionnaire, and undertake an interview. Because probably when you went through about 12 months ago, you could have put in Class 1 and 10 buildings and other types. So we have to look at these Class 2 buildings. So that about sums up what the process is. It's just be aware that when you go on to the application form with the fair trading, you will need to have a list of projects that you've done, a Class 2 projects for that period of time. It will ask you for the name of the project or the address. It'll ask you for the construction certificate number or the DA number. It'll ask you the name of the developer who is going to do the project. It'll also ask you for a name of someone who can give you a reference in relation to that project. So you need to have that ready to go before you actually go online. So I would suggest you need, I know when I tried to apply or applied, I put 6, 7 projects in, others around about that number. So you've got to be able to demonstrate you've been doing this project work for a period of 10 years. It's not that difficult to do. You don't have to be doing Class 2 buildings all the time for 10 years, but over a 10-year period. So that about sums up, but I'm open to questions for sure. And I'm sure there's plenty out there.
Hi, Ian. Me again. I'm just going to read some of the questions out. There's one that's come through from Madison. Hi, Ian. If we have a diploma, we still need to have a minimum of 2 years experience. Yeah,
if you have a diploma of building design, a current diploma of building design, you have to have 5 years experience.
Okay.
And you will not have to go through our accreditation process at all. You have a qualification. And if you have the projects that satisfy the experience level, then you just go straight to the department's application form and fill it out.
Lovely. Right. Gerald has asked, how will sole traders with no Class 2 projects progress to registration in the future? I understand we won't be able to work on Class 2 buildings now.
Unless you've done Class 2 buildings, and you will not be able to get registered for Class 2 buildings. It's as simple as that. The registration will eventually go across to class 1 and 10 and all the other classes as well. The next range of projects they're looking at is they've called up that told us that any building that contains a bed, probably except class 1 and 10, but we're talking then about motels, boarding houses, hostels, healthcare, hospitalities, aged care, nursing homes. So anything that contains a bed will come under the next range of registration, we believe. Class 1 and 10 will probably be several years away.
Okay. That's answered a question that's come through from Stephen. George has asked, what happens if you've been working on residential projects for over 30 years but scarce to get a class 2 project, which was 10 years ago, or recently only one?
So you've been working on a class 2 project already. To be able to lodge that on the planning portal, you will have to get a class 2 registered designer to sign off the forms for that project. So if you're doing it yourself, you're going to have to find somebody who has class 2 registration to work with you, probably as a joint venture or something like that.
So the questions come through. I haven't done any projects in class 2 yet. Can I apply for registration for future projects?
No, because part of the registration process, you have to demonstrate to them projects you have actually done, class 2 projects. For those who haven't done class 2 projects and want to eventually go down that road, the only simple way out is to work with somebody who's a class 2 designer and do some joint ventures or do projects of your own, but have a class 2 designer work with you. And that would get your experience under your belt.
Diego has asked, what if the professional title is from overseas?
Sorry, repeat that one.
What if the professional title is from overseas?
If you have overseas qualifications, we can put you through the accreditation process, and you're going to go our normal accreditation program, and we recognise your qualifications, but you will need to have, as I mentioned before, at least 2 years experience in Australia, and the projects we look at need to be the projects we require under our accreditation program need to be projects that you've actually done in Australia.
Okay. There's another question that's come through about overseas qualifications from Ines. I'm registered for as a medium-rise building designer with an overseas degree. My class 2 projects are mainly apartment alterations. Do these count? Do I need to do the audit? You
will have to be registered as a class 2 designer. There's very, very limited exemptions for the class 2 work. So any changes to a class 2 unit, a sole occupancy unit in general terms, or a granny flat, you have to be registered as a class 2 designer. Given you have medium rise accreditation, you could apply through us for an audit to be able to register with the government on a medium rise building designer.
I'm just going to keep reading through these in because they're coming in thick and fast. Albert has asked, would you have had to do the DA and CC, or can you have just done the CC drawings only?
This applies to the CC project, the CC level of work only. You can still do a DA for a class 2. No, there's no restriction on that. This applies to the CC because what happens is that the CC drawings that you actually lodge have to be signed off by a class 2 designer. They then go to the builder who registers them as the regulated designs that they build from. So it only applies to the construction certificate level.
Lara has asked, are they going to make exceptions for class 2 projects such as granny flats underneath an existing dwelling?
If it's a class 2 building, it applies to a granny flat underneath. That we have spoken to the government, because if we go back a little bit of the history, it was all designed really to stop the problems they're having with the multi-storey residential, the Mascot Towers and the Opal Towers, etc. And by bringing in class 2, I don't think the government really expected to sweep up granny flats. And I think they've been caught a little bit short with that one, and they know that because we point this out to them quite regularly. And they are going to try and address that. But what we're trying to say is, well, look, if it's a granny flat, it's an existing building, it's already there, we're going to alter something in it. Why do we have to go through this long process? So we are working and trying to get some change to that. But if it's a class 2 building, it comes under the regulations.
Andrew has asked, what's the government doing to help develop the skills required, i.e. you can only get registered if you work in the industry for 5 years for someone else?
The only way you can get those skills required for the class 2 work is to do class 2 buildings, unfortunately. There's no simple way out of it. you have to be able to demonstrate that you're competent to do Class 2 work. And this is where our accreditation program comes into play, because we'll look at Class 2 buildings. We're probably a little bit more flexible than what the government may require. For registration, we require you to put in, if you don't have a qualification, we require you to put 3 projects in, Class 2 projects. The government's probably going to look at you. You've got to demonstrate to them that you've been doing this over a 10-year period. We look at it, if you don't have qualifications, we look at it over a 5-year period. So it's probably a little bit simpler to go through us. We're a little bit more flexible. We're not that flexible, but we can be a little bit more flexible than what the government is.
Nicole's just posted a comment in the chat box saying, just letting everyone know the planning portal has a glitch where it classifies alterations and additions, dual occupancies, etc. as Class 2 instead of Class 1, and they're apparently working on the issue. So are you aware of that?
The planning portal, it's a mess. Well, I won't say a total mess, but there's a lot of issues in it that need to be resolved. And the only thing, if you find there's a problem in the planning portal when you go on there, and I've come across this several times myself, is simply just ring up the people that run the planning portal. Or in my area, I'm up in Port Macquarie, we have our local council here, has a lady down there who takes up all our problems and sorts them out for us. And I make good use of that, I tell you, because yeah, you think you got it right, and the next time you do it, it's different again. It just keeps changing. But yeah, there are hiccups in it.
So Damien has asked, how long does the assessment take once submitted? I have several projects that need signing off right now.
Okay, once you get all your stuff together, and that would probably take you a couple of weeks, I would imagine, if you download the application form and the information handbook and work out through the application form. It sort of explains all the things we're going to need. Once you've lodged it, you do that online with an online lodgement form where you upload all your information. We receive that. We then send you an invoice for the fee. Once you pay that, it's about at the moment, it's about 4 to 5 weeks before we can actually finish off the actual application.
Okay. How will sole traders with no Class 2 projects progress to registration in the future? So I think we've covered that. I understand we won't be able to work on Class 2 buildings now.
Yeah, well, sole traders, I think the reality is you're going to have to be a sole trader that has does a joint venture with a design practitioner. It's as simple as that.
Andrew has asked, if you hold a similar QBCC Queensland licence, is there to be any reciprocal agreements?
There is no interstate recognition across border of any qualification in Australia anywhere. I think that's a simple answer. When we do accreditation, our accreditation, we do recognise the fact that you are registered in Queensland, and we go a little bit easier on what that process is because you've already gone through a process, but there's no mutual recognition between states. And I think if I point out all the wonderful way each state works together in this COVID kerfuffle, you can understand what I'm saying.
Ashwin has asked, will BDAA approach other registered Class 2 designers who are willing to work in JV, which I'm assuming is joint ventures, so that those who are not able to register can do so in the future?
I think for those Class 2 designers, quite often they'll work with people who don't have that qualification and they'll do a joint venture with them. But the way it works is that the registered designer doesn't necessarily have to have done the drawings. They just need to sign off and do the verification certification on it that it complies with the BCA. So there is opportunity there for people to do Class 2 design and drawings themselves, relate to a Class 2 design practitioner to do the verification, and then that project is part of their portfolio.
Okay. There's a question about whether a basement under a dual occupancy is Class 2.
Depends. If it becomes a sole occupancy unit, it's a Class 2. For an example, you could have 2 townhouses or 4 townhouses with a common garage underneath. That is Class 2. Normally townhouses are Class 1, but that becomes a Class 2. But if you have townhouses with their own independent garages underneath, they still remain Class 1. But if you turn that garage into a granny flat, that becomes a Class 2.
Okay. Gavin has asked, am I correct that Class 2 work in the ACT region does not need to comply at this stage with the latest New South Wales regulations?
ACT at this stage hasn't brought in any regulations. My gut feel, and we do follow up with the ACT. Generally, they do follow what happens in New South Wales because it's just so part of cross-border recognition there. But there has been no actual requirement in Canberra or ACT for Class 2 registration at this stage.
Jean Paul has asked, our AAO DMN has advised that a thermal performance assessor working on Class 2 units does not need to be registered. Can you confirm?
Oh, what? So I need to repeat that one. But
I'm not sure what an AAO DMN is.
I need to find out what that is. It comes down to anybody designing, doing any design work for a Class 2 building, whether they be architectural designs, building designs, engineering, electrical, mechanical, hydraulic, etc., has to be registered to do Class 2 work. So I would presume that whatever that lot is, if they're going to be working on Class 2 buildings, they will have to become registered.
So I've just been told DMN is design matters. Right, okay, that's answered that. Hugh has asked, will there be a list of Class 2 accredited designers within the BDAA we can approach? We've answered that one, I think.
What we're going to do is on our website now, we have a list. You can go there and find out, you can look up accredited designers, building designers. What we want to do is expand that out to a more, it's not like find a designer per se, but we would have a list of designers there. We would have to have your name, what state you're in, what license level you have within your state, and that would include Class 2 building for New South Wales, because we don't have any other licensing. But for Tasmania, you have your different license levels down there. Queensland has their license levels. I think we should try and expand that to anyone can go on there and find a person in their area with the required registration level that they'd like to work with.
I think that would be a useful resource. Hugh, no, we've done that. Lara has said, we were told by the New South Wales Planning Portal to lodge dual occupancy as a Class 1 dwelling because the system is currently making Class 2. Then add notes to the application that's the Class 1, and also notify the relevant certifying authority, council or private surveyor, certify about it as well.
Yeah, generally dual occupancies are Class 1. But again, the same as 2 townhouses side by side is a dual occupancy. But if you whack a common garage underneath, it becomes Class 2. So just be careful when you go through what your classification of the building are, is to get it right. Because the planning portal is very, very strict in, you put the wrong number in there, that's it. It just won't back off. So yeah, just check your classifications there.
Henry has asked, an extension to a warehouse that's 4,000 square metres, is it Class 2?
No, not unless it contains a sole occupancy unit. It wouldn't be a Class 2. And again, if it's I guess you've got to look at how many sort of warehouses would have a sole occupancy unit in it. But unless it's got a sole occupancy unit, no, there's no restriction on there at all. Genesis
has asked, can you apply for the Class 2 licence registration referencing jobs done in other states?
Yes, you can use other states, as long as they're Class 2 projects. There's no restriction on where they were done. Mainly they say, though, as they've said before, that you have to have 10 years experience or 5 years if you have the qualification, but you must have at least 2 years Australian experience. So they say Australian, that means any state.
Okay. Michael Tomlinson has said, I believe there's mutual recognition with Tasmania and Queensland. And there was between Queensland and Victoria. I'm not sure about that.
I think he's looking at there at cross-border recognition, interstate recognition of qualifications. There is some arrangement, I believe, between Victoria and Queensland. Victoria has no other, as I'm fully aware at the moment, has no other recognition of any other state. I do believe there is some recognition between Queensland and Victoria.
Louise has said, just for clarification, for registration with the Department of Fair Trading with medium rise accreditation, you can submit 2 projects you've done over the last 10 years. Yeah, well,
what you're looking at in medium rise would be to submit classification or classes of buildings that apply to that. You need to have that within that 10 years experience, but you would probably need a portfolio of works of more than just 2 or 3 buildings or projects. you would need to have a reasonable portfolio. The interesting thing is I can't say exactly how many that is, because I've heard from several people who apply, they have put different numbers of projects in. Some have been knocked back and some have been accepted. So we just don't know the answer, but we will try and find what that level is.
Benita said, were we able to clarify since the last webinar on the Class 2 changes whether a granny flat located over a garage, where that garage is not for the secondary dwelling, but rather a garage servicing the primary dwelling, is Class 2?
Well, generally, a granny flat over a garage is a Class 2. I would suggest that if you have any doubt about that, you need to speak to a BCA consultant or your certifier and get them to clarify exactly what that they class that to be. It gets comes a little bit of a grey area where it's a sole occupancy unit, not above. But if you look at a townhouses above a common garage, that is a Class 2 building. But if they're independent garages underneath the townhouse, they're not. But if you have a granny flat over a garage and that garage belongs to the residents, that fits that criteria of Class 2.
So Adrian has asked a question. We are both medium rise accredited designers at the moment, currently doing our application for registration as Class 2 building designers. You mentioned something about needing to carry out an NCC questionnaire as well as an audit or something thereabouts. Was the above comments regarding those applying for accreditation or registration or both? And also for registration, I ticked the box for 5 years, with the last 10 years, including 2 years in Australia. The dates needed to add up to the years selected. The New South Wales system at the moment.
I need to know if they're applying online, if they're referring to the online application for fair trading before I can answer that one.
I mean, it's probably a good time to say that people can contact you directly with something.
Yep, for sure. Anyone's got a question, contact me. I'm always available to talk to anybody, and once I find out a little bit more, I can usually give you a fairly good answer to any of your questions.
Sure. I think we've got through most of the questions, and apologies if I've missed any, but please email Ian directly. I'm going to wrap up the formal part of the meeting now for those that have to leave, but if we've still got you online, Jemima, I'll try and get back to some of your questions as well. So Sarah Jane is going to put a QR code up on the screen.
I'm happy to do that myself.
Thank you, Ian.
Pleasure.
A big thank you to our presenters and those who contributed questions. It's been a really interesting discussion today and lots of information. So thank you to everyone for joining us. The next online chapter meeting will be Tuesday, the 7th of September at 1 p.m. So keep an eye out for the registration email. So I'll stay online. If you've got more questions for Jemima or for Ian, please post them and we'll do our best to answer them. And apart from that, we'll see you in September. So Jemima, are you still online with us? We might have lost Jemima. All right, Ian, I'm going to see.
I'm here.
Oh, you're there. Lovely. Thank you for hanging around to keep answering questions.
That's okay.
So there's a few questions there. Do you have forecasts for the future in terms of the building industry in general once the pandemic is over?
Do I have physical forecasts or do I have a feeling?
What do you see happening?
Well, there's definitely going to be a slowdown. Things have been going up at a rate that at some point it has to turn around. When do I see that slowdown? Like, as I said before, we think the next 12 months will be very active around the world. There has been over the summer holidays, as the US market has opened up because of vaccinations. And when I say opened up, I mean people have started to holiday again and everything in the US. We have seen a slight slowdown in the DIY market. So the pro dealer market in the USA, which is their builder side, still strong, out for 12 months. They just can't get enough product. The side that's slowing down is the DIY because people are now holidaying again. They've just had their summer holidays. And many of the distributors in the USA that I supply to have said that they've seen what's a slowdown, but it's still at levels well above where they normally are. So I don't think the Australian market's going to see anything like this for 12 plus months. But when it does come off, truth is we're expecting it to come off relatively hard. But in saying that's, I don't have a crystal ball. I don't know. It's just a feeling based on the fact of how fast it's gone up.
Okay. I've just got a comment here that just to say, just getting back to the Class 2 buildings, just pausing for a moment, Jemano, that any members who have got questions relating to Class 2 issues with the government portal or suggestions on how the portal could be improved, to please email the BDAA via the email address and ask Ian. Okay, so the email address, Ian, are you there? So if we use accreditation@bdaa.com.au as the email address. Right. So there are some more questions that have come through. So it sounds like we need to manufacture here with local logs. Is anyone lobbying the Morrison government? Surely Carter, Holt, Harvey or similar could get something up and running with government assistance.
Well, Carter, Holt, Harvey have pretty much withdrawn completely from Australia. So Carter's sold their New South Wales assets to AKD. So just on Carter, Holt, Harvey, they've pretty much withdrawn. They're gone back to New Zealand. They're out in the Australian market.
Right.
The Australian producers, are they lobbying governments? Well, I don't think it's a lack of production capacity here. It's more a lack of log. So we've got plenty of capacity in the big Hines sawmill down in Tumbarumba, the sawmills of AKD in Tumut, and Boral sawmill. Boral's recently been sold, but Boral sawmill in Oberon, the Highland pine mill. There's plenty of capacity. The issue is feedstock. New South Wales forests are planting now have realised that they short planted and are planting at a rapid rate, but they'll take 10 years to get ahead of the curve. That's what they're suggesting. I don't know what else these guys can do because Australian hardwood, a lot of the hardwood forests are locked up, but obviously for structural component for house building, hardwood no longer plays a big role in that component. Hardwood's predominantly decorative now, flooring and furniture, and it's more specialised. So the native forests don't offer a real solution to Australia's building issues. It's the plantations that are critical, and quite a lot of those were damaged through the fires.
Now, Lockie has posted another question, which goes back to a question that he'd asked earlier about demand for timber. He said, would you say that ultimately it would be balanced out and still of benefit to the environment because it will drive demand for new forestry?
Yeah, 100%. Like forestry around, like especially countries like South America, Brazil, Chile, some of the largest plantations in the world, the USA, southern yellow pine plantations. There's a lot of planting happening around the world. So timber is truly the only renewable resource there is. It has a number of benefits. So the demand will balance, supply will balance. What we've seen, it really is a black swan event. We were caught short. Many of your members will remember maybe 2 or 3 years ago, there was a bit of a shortage in framing in Australia, but it took about a month to get product flowing from Europe to cover that shortage because there wasn't this demand around the world all at the same time. So Australia had a bit of a shortage. The European producers came to the rescue. People like ITI, we were importing up to 1,000 containers of framing every couple of months to meet the shortage. It was easy to fix. The problem today is that the whole world's gone mad at the same time. The consumption for it all to happen at the same time has just hit us for six, I guess.
Yeah. Has. So Mauricio has said, is there any sustainably sourced native timber you can suggest we can specify to cover the demand, or Australia just doesn't supply native timber in the required quantities?
Well, demand when you say demand, again, are we talking about for structural timbers for building? Because if that's the case, then no. Australian native timbers are all hardwoods and they're not used for structural building anymore. They're mainly used for decorative purposes, for flooring and that. Flooring is not, I don't see a huge shortage of flooring. So that the big shortages are in engineered wood and in structural framing. So the things that go into the structural components of a house. So that's where the big shortages are in Australia. And our forests, our native forests, don't offer a solution to that.
Okay. Louise has asked, will prices ever go back to pre-COVID conditions?
Okay. As a seller of the product, we hope not. For many, many years, producers have lost a lot of money. A lot of this problem in Australia is because of mill shutdowns in New Zealand, who couldn't compete any longer, couldn't make any money. There will be definitely a price will back off. We've seen price backing off in the USA for structural lumber as their market just slows a little bit over their holiday period. That's not happening in Europe. That's not happening here or in China. But we've definitely seen a pullback on pricing in the USA, but it's still, I think it's fallen about 40 to 50% from its peak, but that still puts it at 2 to 3 times where it was a year ago. We will see prices come off. There's no doubt that as demand falls away and production catches up and surpasses demand, it's the old, demand versus supply, we will see. But I'd suggest that producers may try and maintain profitable businesses in the future and may try and keep prices not where they are today, not that high, but at a level that makes sense. Timber was really undervalued for many, many years. And I think while it's gone beyond the fair value, it wasn't at fair value before COVID. It was well under.
So there's a couple of questions about alternatives, which I guess you're in the timber industry, but do you see specifiers and builders using alternatives, and what are they? And Gavin has suggested, will steel framing take over a portion of the residential market?
Okay, so steel framing, Gavin's right, steel framing has captured some share during this period, but I am very close friends with the manager of a steel roll distribution business in New South Wales, one of the biggest, and they have similar problems to us. They have between 8 and 16-week lead times. They've had more price increases than the timber industry in the last 6 months. So they are facing the same shortages. I mean, not just steel framing. South Australia went a whole month without steel mesh. So they couldn't put slabs on the ground because there was no mesh in South Australia. So they're facing the same issues we're facing. And so, yes, while some market share will be lost to steel, I think some of it will be short term and some of it will be forever. Some builders may go to steel and not come back. That's happened. It's not an answer today because they cannot scale up fast enough to cover what's happening.
Yeah, okay. There's a couple of comments. Jamie has said he thinks hemp is something we need to start seriously considering as it's a more long-term sustainable product than what timber is.
Hemp, I'm sorry, I'm no expert in hemp, and it's farming or harvesting or production, so I don't know how to answer that question. But in saying that, I timber products, forestry around the world is, as I say, one of the most renewable resources, sustainable resources there is. Even the question about steel framing, you can only take so much coal and all the things that are required and energy to make steel. And where timber can be replanted, like they've got tree cycles down to 20 years now between planting and harvesting. So I don't know about hemp, I'm sorry, but definitely timber is still, as far as I can see, the most renewable resource out there.
So Scott has said, are there any suppliers trying to recycle timber from big demolition projects?
Yeah, that's been happening for a long time. There are specific companies, I think, like Ironwood and some other mills up the northern New South Wales coastline, smaller mills, because obviously there's not a lot of that resource around, that do exactly that. But it costs a bomb. But that's what they do. We just demolished a big factory down in Altona, and all the timber out of that was recycled by some of these type of companies. So that definitely happens and is very popular.
Jimena, I think that brings us to the end. Just double checking this. Hang on, there's some more. If I've missed any, we can always shoot them through to you and get some information if there's anybody that, if I've missed something.
I did notice a comment. Someone talked about prefabricated modular houses.
Yes, that's in the chat box. That's right.
Yeah, so just on that, so there is a plant in Australia that's been built by Hine, which is an XLM plant, which is doing what's called CLT, so cross-laminated timber panels. And that's a big rage in Europe, and it's getting popular in the USA. Still needs a lot of wood fibre, but it's a different way of building. And two companies in Australia that tried this have both gone broke because Australian builders still, so if I can just sort of, the European markets, when you go there, they're very happy to just build very similar, the same style box. Panels can easily be dropped into that sort of application. But here where Australians like to have something unique and different, and each house is slightly altered and there's no big mass building trend, it hasn't taken off. We've looked at it and we are keen to invest in it in the future. There's not an answer today for Australia, but CLT panels are being produced. There's another CLT panel plant being built in Tasmania, I think. So it'll be interesting to see. And we've seen some tall buildings already done with CLT panels, you know, in New South Wales down there at Barangaroo. I think they did an 8-story or 13-story timber panel build. So no, definitely in regards to that comment, some of that is happening. Whether the wind fireproof, sorry, I was just reading the comment. So there's some of that happening. Composite panels as well, but we've tried some composite panels and they failed miserably so far. But that's not to say, I'm talking about short-term future, long-term future. It's not to say that that sort of building won't come to Australia.
And yes, I know definitely CLT is developing in Australia and Tasmania.
Yeah, exactly. It is making an impact, but again, very limited resource for those CLT plants, and they're struggling to make the plant panels that they need. But a big thing in Europe, I was in Europe before lockdown visiting a number of producers producing CLT plants and doing off-site construction, trying to learn to look at what we could potentially bring into the country. And like I say, 2 of those off-site construction companies in Australia, both in New South Wales, shut their doors in the last 18 months after years of trying to get it going.
Right. Lockie's made a comment, agreed about comments re hemp and other carbon sequestering materials. It's time to look for alternatives. Steel should be minimised and used where absolutely required. And he's just posted a link for a materials food pyramid for more info. And as Nick also pointed out, hempcrete still needs a timber frame. They go together, although hemp blocks you can construct without the timber frame.
Okay, that'd be interesting.
And Joseph has asked, what are your thoughts on bamboo given how fast it grows?
Well, bamboo, there is bamboo's becoming a bit more popular in decks and in floorings and in engineered flooring. So you can buy, it's quite, it's growing its market share. Rather than solid timber flooring, you're getting a lot of this floating floor, and a lot of that's created with bamboo. Problem with bamboo is its stability, and yes, it needs to be laminated. It's very dense. It's very hard to construct framing with. So it's great in decorative type products, like I say, decking products and engineered flooring products. I haven't seen anywhere where anyone's really successfully been able to produce it in quantities that can be used for structural components. So it has its uses, no doubt. And we sell some of the engineered flooring created with bamboo these days, you know, but it still has stability issues that need to be engineered out of it.
All right. I think that brings us to an end. Thank you very much, Mano.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
It's been a really interesting discussion, and there's obviously a lot of interest in talking points around timber and what's happening. So thank you.
No, you're welcome.
Around.
Okay, thank you.
All right, bye.
Bye.